which actually was the first bit of a challenge to have the cultural and creative sectors talk as an industry or within the narrative of an industry. The second point dealt with investment, increased public investment, but also private investment. Investment which doesn't come only from the cultural sector, but also from other industries. The third element that emerged from that conversation and that strategy was a reaction to what could have been brain drain, or what was brain drain, in order to enhance, develop the local cultural sector and creative industries. Then there was a conversation on how do we bring in other sectors as part of the conversation of the creative industries of the creative economy. So that's where kind of we've come from, but we have to reconcile that. And personally speaking, I think that conversation has been muted in recent years, talking about the creative economy and all those kind of subjects which have emerged. So today is an opportunity to revisit a little bit this topic, rethink this topic, but also bring in a wider perspective in addressing not just the challenges of the cultural and creative sectors and this thing called the creative economy, but also look at how this process, this narrative, can become not just stronger within the local ecosystem, but a more wider global ecosystem. So these big questions will be addressed today with my dear friends and colleagues, starting with Marilyn. You know, Marilyn from Ireland. She is a all these new terms now. Marilyn. So Marilyn runs now her own consultancy company, Cafà. 48 hours ago, was it 48 hours? 12 hours. Marilyn has been appointed as chair of EITM Culture and Creativity, which we're going to hear a lot about today. Not directly from Marilyn, but from someone who is online with us from the regional hub south, Elisa Brento. Elisa, can you see us, hear us? From EITM Culture and Creativity. Hi, Elisa. We have Adriano Picinati di Torcello, who's a global and finance coordinator at the Weight Group, and of course a familiar face, Galea, president of MEIA, but also entrepreneur herself, and later on will be joined by Florencia Giulio. She's the founder of Pulso. So, is everyone okay? Ready to go? And I'd really like this to be a very open conversation. I'm not a massive group, so please, the moment where you want to raise a question, address a provocation, absolutely disagree with what is being said, just let me know and I'll pass on the microphone if we have another microphone around us being running around. And the structure will be, we'll spend kind of 45 minutes, an hour, having this open conversation, and then perhaps we can have smaller conversations in smaller groups, and then we'll regroup at the very end. Okay. So let's start with the first big question. Because we have this term, the creative economy. And let's set the tone right. The world hasn't yet agreed on what this creative economy is all about, or how it's defined, or finding one definition. From your own worldview and how you see this creative economy, what is it? What are we talking about here? Who wants to have a first go? Adriano, ready to? According to the OECD.
Exactly, so I can say that. First of all, I would like to thank Maria for this first and I would say 3-day summit. Being on the development side, so I'm also at your level of my side because my position on the creative sector is quite limited. But I said we know each other for quite some time, so we try to do a joint conference together in Malta. This year it didn't work out, maybe another year. So she's Maltese, my boss are Maltese in Luxembourg, so there's some kind of good connection. So congrats for what you've done for these 3 days, and I wish you all the best. So that's to start. No, thank you very much for inviting me. introduce a little bit myself and to position myself, so, and answer to your question. I'm not the classic Deloitte guy that you can find in the world, so I'm not the classic consultant guy that is aiming for just making a lot of revenues. More than 20 years ago, I kind of started to look at what was happening in the art sector, the visual art sector, and I found that super interesting and plenty of mega transforming the ecosystem. And when I joined Deloitte 18 years ago, I created art inside Deloitte. It's a positioning in two sectors, wealth management, art and collectible wealth. It's also a positioning on the visual art sector, which is one of the pillars of the creative industry, and of course also we are positioned on the cultural sector. We don't try to sell art, we don't try to sell any collectibles, we are not art advisors. What we try to do is to bring all the Deloitte services to the stakeholders that are into them. Now, a little bit of history and why I've moved into creative sectors beside the visual art sector. So, looking at the trends transforming the art and finance ecosystem, something that I kind of created a lot of interest from us emerged around 2022. When we did our first our conferences, our annual art and finance conference at the Attica. So then at that point, we were discussing issues around financing the visual art sector, methodology to measure impact and all of that. And probably this is something that we will expand more. Now, of course, from that, so we move into the creative sectors. This in Luxembourg, also something that is important for you to understand, because in Luxembourg we have the EIF, the European Investment Funds. And some years ago, so Luxembourg, EIF, in fact, the European Investment Funds based in Luxembourg, launched the Cultural and Creative Sector Guarantee Facility, which is a program that had to support financial institutions to provide loan to players, stakeholders in the creative world. And as so Deloitte started to support a certain numbers of financial institutions in Europe, to get to know, to get familiar with the creative sectors. And I understood that in Malta you don't have yet, not yet, so let's take this opportunity to make a call, so just to have one that could facilitate that. But coming back to your question, so what is the creative sectors? Of course, I started to look at that, and depending if you take the book of Hopkins, correct? No, Hopkins, so exactly the founder of the creative sectors kind of definition. So there is mentioning a certain numbers of sectors from audiovisual, software, gaming, and like when you take the UNESCO definition, they add cultural heritage. So everyone is, not everyone, but there are several definitions that goes around. Everyone has a definition. And of course, so let's make, for the external people that are not familiar with the creative sector, the creative industry, very difficult to understand first what's in it. And on top of that, so as we have different sub-sectors that are answering to different kind of business models, from for-profit, so it makes also for investors the discussion very difficult. It's a quite opaque, I would say, industry, and this is why so we need to start with, of course, better definition, better understanding definition, and on top of that, so what we need is to have a taxonomy to really understand how much jobs, how much companies working in this environment. So just to start.
So we're putting one of the first things out there. And an interesting anecdote, I was once challenged by one of our finance ministers here. I was telling him why the creative industry is creative economy, and he was like, but what's in this creative economy? Why don't you put accountancy in there? Because even they are creative, you know? And I was like, but there's a little difference between creativity and the creative industries. But I couldn't really understand what the term challenge. How do we explain? What are we talking about here?
I mean, just one point, so I think what is also interesting to differentiate is creative goods versus creative services.
Yeah.
So which are also two important.
Which would be creative goods. The difference between creative goods and creative services?
Creative goods is definitely an asset, so something that you can own. Creative services, this is something that, for example, use streaming for music, so that's a creative service. So it's not something that you can possess. It's more underneath.
Right.
So I come from initially an arts background, so even being called creative was just not a word that we accepted in the arts very much so, I would imagine, I would say. but I now work in the creative economy. And things have changed dramatically in Ireland in the last 10 years. So I'm Irish, I live on the west coast of Ireland, I work right across Europe. A former expert at the European Commission with Tony in Capitals of Culture. And our conversation in Ireland changed in 2015 with the birth of Creative Ireland. Because in Ireland, we probably have the youngest Ministry of Culture in Europe, established in 1993. The Arts Council was established under the term of the Arts Act in 1951. So we had this very unusual situation where our Film Council and our Arts Council came before the department, before we had a Department for Culture in 1993. So we had this very unusual situation where we had a definition of the arts under the Arts Act. And the last time the Arts Act was updated was 2003 to include spectacle and to include architecture, for example. And we started moving more towards creative industries, creative sector. I think a big part of the conversation for us has been the end of digitalization and how the digital world has really affected our world. And when the two collided, it became this creative economy and this new language and this new way of talking about our sector. And I think the Triple Helix, and certainly the colleagues in EIT who actually know far more than I about the Triple Helix, that really was something that was of enormous interest, where the sector, together with innovation, together with research, was really starting to work together. And I think that that's a really interesting model, because a huge part of our world was not having the data to even justify our existence, never mind to quantify or quantify what we were actually trying to do. And because I came from very much a grassroots level, very much from the ground up, I was working with artists, I was working with communities, I worked on European Capital of Culture, our UNESCO City of Film designation, our European Region of Gastronomy designation, our European Green Leaf designation, and I found myself leaning more and more to the European definitions. Of course, there still is no definition, and I think it's a huge problem for the sector. But also, does creativity need to be defined? How do you define creativity? How do you even say to an artist, how to define your boundaries and your limitations? Because sometimes that's what definitions do. And if you're completely creative, working within a definition is very different too, if that's the way your mind works. I'm still visual, so even working on strategy or development, I have to draw it out before I can write it, before I can cost it. And that's just the way my brain works. So I'm an absolute creative working in the creative economy, trying to justify the existence of the entire sector at all levels. And it's difficult. But we do need to define who we are, and we do need to start working towards more global definitions. And even we were talking earlier, do we just all adopt the UNESCO definition of culture, the UNESCO definition of creative economy, which is actually broad enough and not specific enough to allow for creativity to flourish, which is, probably where we need to end up, so that we can have global conversations. And even, we were talking about this yesterday, how many Creative Europe projects where you spend 3 days with your new partners talking about this, because we are from different parts of Europe, completely different grassroots, completely different legislation, completely different ways of working. Some have arts councils, some have film councils, some have creative councils. In the UK, the model around the Creative Industries Council is really excellent, and the work that they're doing in CoStar is excellent. As an Irish person looking to the UK as a model of best practice, it's kind of, really hard for me, but the work in the UK is really, really fantastic. I think it's a model we really could be looking at, even though they've left Europe, and we're still very sore about that in Ireland, because now we're the only English-speaking country, even though, like you, we're Irish, and we speak Irish first. Tony and I have this debate about our little island countries, owning our definition and owning who we are. So when people say to me, oh, your first language is English. No, it's not. My first language is Irish, and it's Irish because Malta. Do you know that? Very interesting, we had this conversation when the Maltese government forced Europe to identify and acknowledge our language. then the Irish government did the same. So Irish is now a European language because of Malta. So we're always connected on these things. We're always connected on our brotherhood of love for our language and place. And actually I think that's it. Culture is, it's each of us. It's who we are and where we live, what we do and how we do it. You know, so whether that form of expression is through art and food and culture and language, you know, Mutsanga, my language, Irish, not English. It's a big thing. It's hard to find that when it's so different from country to country. And I think that's the other thing. The things that make us very local are the things that connect us as Europeans. And do we really want to find that? But we kind of have to, even though we don't want to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mr. Banker?
Deloitte is not a bank, so...
Banking 5 here, banking 5.
I think I'm an artistic person to my kind of. My mother, she's a painter, so this is probably why I'm...
You are get banking 5.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but I have to say, when I talk about creative sectors, or even art and finance at Deloitte, they ask me, what is art and finance? What is creative sector? I need to, consultants. They are really kind of accountants. So they want things, that ask, well, this is why, so having definitions, having numbers, so it's helping everyone, even myself, so my day-to-day job.
It helps everyone to have the data, and I think that's why things like the EIT is very important, and the triple helix of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it at a European level. And also, may I say, I think a huge thing for our sector has been the introduction of the Culture Compass, and obviously the commissioner is from Malta. I mean, how amazing is that? That this concept has been born here, bred here, and now all of Europe is adopting the Culture Compass. I think
Just
this is
taking over here, which is
fantastic.
our way how we need the post-colonialism. MEIA.
Hello, Irish.
Let's bring Brussels to Malta, it's definitely better.
So I'm MEIA. Thank you all for being here. Just a bit of background of my life. Sometimes I'm wearing multiple hats, so just to give this context why I'm sitting up here as well, not just as MEIA. I've always been between the intersection of creativity and business. I was brought up also in a family who worked with creatives, but also on a very entrepreneurial level. I studied art and finance and Sotheby's, and then I discovered wider creative industries, and I studied recently in arts and culture enterprise. I am very, very fond of this conversation because sometimes I even travel to just be part of it, and Adriana knows. I think for me, the creative economy, first of all, in our position as MEIA, for those of you who don't know what MEIA is, MEIA was founded in 2020 during COVID. It was a response to COVID. Thomas, Vice President, back then. I'm actually here next to him. The organization was created as a voice for the sector. The sector came together to lobby for artists and creative practitioners' rights. And beyond advocacy, we also find research and education. MEIA, I think our highlight is the budget now, right? Just passed. In the budget, we try and justify what the creative economy is and the impact it creates, both quantitative and qualitative, on a daily basis with politicians, with institutions, with even communities around us. And I think we need these definitions for us to be able to really communicate that impact. In the budget, every year we try and create a system more than one proposition. In Malta, we are living in a, let's call it, transitional period. The government invested heavily in the sector. However, there is still this unsustainability, lack of infrastructure, lack of professionalization. A lot of people become generalists or have to do a lot of things to survive. So our motto this year was stability. How can we reach stability in the sector? And first, every year, we have to justify to the finance minister and why this is important and this is needed. And they asked us for numbers, but the problem was always quantifying the impact, because numbers are not non-existent, but the data collection wasn't properly collected. So that was one of our lobbying issues, which we're now also trying to solve. Not to go into other questions. For us, I think the creative economy has always been like this chain, right? Chain that never ends, and you always keep on adding to it as the world evolves. Like the digital age, technology, science. Tomorrow we'll be looking at creativity through science. So for me, I'm
Florence has made it from the airport in time. So how long will it take? It depends on the traffic. Things have been okay. So I'll give some time for him to breathe and get back to you. What we can hear already is this kind of, these different sectors finding their space within